Hello, and welcome to the ProjectWise Administrator Advanced Accreditation course on Managed Workspaces. This lesson is Introduction to the Dynamic Managed Workspace. What is the Dynamic Managed Workspace? It is a templated managed workspace. Because it is templated, it saves time in setup, both in the workspace and projects. It also saves time in debugging. In addition to this, it has extended capabilities that will be discussed during this lesson. In this lesson, you will be shown the basic capabilities of the Dynamic Managed Workspace, but not necessarily how to fully configure it. You will see how the Dynamic Managed Workspace uses text-based configuration files, how the PWSetup files allow for customization. We will look at the Work Area PWSetup control file, which determines which workspace to load. We will look at the Workspace PWSetup file, which allows for workspace-specific customization. The Dynamic Managed Workspace is templated, so you don't have to recreate the configuration. This template includes the required framework folders and files, as well as a few examples. A brief demonstration of the installation will be shown later. Because it is templated, all the hard work is done. The Dynamic Managed Workspace uses text-based configuration files in lieu of CSBs for the most part. Template CFG files are pre-configured to allow for workset files to be located in a work area. So we've already done that configuration. The dynamic naming showed in the implementation guides is included in the template as well. Rather than using CSBs to name the workspace, this is enabled by using a configuration file located within the work area, which stores the workspace name and a couple of other parameters. We will demonstrate this as well. Version control can be implemented by only allowing specific versions of the product to be opened under a specific work area. One of the other key functions of the Dynamic Managed Workspace is path validation. This is very similar to what was shown in the error checking session. A demonstration of this will be provided as well. We've also introduced an idea called workspace groups. This is the idea that you can have groups of workspaces, say grouped by clients, and within that group of client workspaces, you can have versions of configurations. These versions of configurations can be simply identified by changing a variable which represents the folder name of the configuration. Enhanced configuration snippets are also provided. These include the ability to check a number of situations when the file opens, like the version of the product being open, the version of ProjectWise Explorer, the operating system, for example, is it a server or is it a workstation? You can also check, is this an ICS job? We can also check the file extension to see if it's a DWG file where it is being opened by a server-side process. There are also options to enable a local workspace if they exist. This includes pre-established variables for ProjectWise Drive, as well as general locally installed versions of a client workspace. The Dynamic Managed Workspace has an advanced ability to parse folder names. This is better shown than verbally explained. We will demonstrate this later as well. This image shows conceptually how the Dynamic Managed Workspace is organized. First, it's initialized by a CSB that simply points to a common configuration file. Within that configuration file, we establish some standard variables like the dynamic names. It then branches to another configuration file or series of configuration files which give us some of those enhanced capabilities. The first thing is we look at a file to get the default settings that may have been established. We then can look at the environment check. We can look at version detection, the ProjectWise Explorer detection. This then has an additional branch at this point where it looks at the work area and it reads that work area control file. Based on the directions given in that control file, it then may go look at workspace groups. After parsing that information, it then goes back to the common configuration file where it determines if it's a V8 or Connect configuration. If it detects it's a V8 configuration, it will verify the workspace location and process the workspace specific setup. If it's a Connect configuration, it will find and verify the Connect configuration and process that workspace specific setup. This next image shows the actual template content. We have a Bentley 2023 folder. Inside that, we will find the common predefined CFG file, which is what the CSB looks for. Underneath that is an underbar PWSetup folder. This folder contains many of the enhanced configuration options. The first file it looks at is the common predefined PWSetup CFG file, which then branches into the other enhanced options, including workspace groups. The first demonstration will show copying the template into the data source. We will create a projects area. Then we will copy a template work set into the projects area. At this point, you might want to download the template workspace. This can be most easily found by simply searching for Dynamic Managed Workspace. Links to the various versions of the template can be found at the bottom of the page shown on the right. Once that is done, unzip that file locally where we can drag the contents into ProjectWise Explorer. For the purpose of this demonstration, I have extracted the zip file to temp DMW. This zip file contains two directories, a Bentley 2023 directory and a Client Workspaces directory. If you have not already installed the Dynamic Managed Workspace, create a Resources folder and simply drag these two folders into that location. What I will show you in this demonstration is a situation where I already have the Dynamic Managed Workspace installed or a previous version of it, and I will be showing how to take the contents of the zip file and incorporate that into an existing structure. The first thing we'll do is just simply drag the Bentley 2023 folder into the Resources folder. The next thing we will do is go into Client Workspaces, get the client name folder, and drag that into the Client Workspaces folder in ProjectWise Explorer. If you already have a client name folder, you can simply take the contents under that folder and drag it into the client name folder as well. Let's now create a project's work area. For this case, I'm going to create a Project 2023 folder. In the client name folder, there should be a Configuration 2023 folder. We'll go under Workspaces, CE Workspace Example Advanced, go into Worksets, and we will take the Connect example, copy that, and put that in our Project 2023 folder. The next thing we need to do is to upgrade this to a work area so our dynamic capabilities will function. This completes the first demonstration. In the next demonstration, we will create the CSB and apply it. We will test the setup. We will explain the work area control file and explain workspace groups. For this part of the demonstration, I have ProjectWise Administrator on the right and ProjectWise Explorer on the left. Open ProjectWise Administrator to the Workspace's Managed Predefined section. This is where we will create our CSB. To make this easier for you, the syntax of the CSB is provided in the documentation section. We can go to Documentation, Configuration Templates, and find the CSBs folder. Let's look at the CSB Common Predefined CFG file. Let's just open that with Notepad. Let's just create now a new CSB. We will call that Bentley Common Predefined 2023. Let's then go to the Configuration tab, select Add Variable. We can then copy the variable name from the CFG file provided. Rather than putting this in as a string value, let's use the ProjectWise folder option and browse to the Bentley 2023 folder. Let's then add a directive. We will use the string value this time. And we can copy this portion of the syntax as well. We do not want to copy the include portion, just what is following that. The next step is to apply the CSB. We can then go into the project and open a file. We see that the workspace is downloading. This is a good sign of success. Once the file is open, we just check our indicator in the lower right-hand corner, and we see that indeed the proper workspace and workset have loaded. So as we discussed, we want to take a look at the work area PWSetup file. Let's look at that in Notepad. We discussed the idea of workspace groups earlier. This is controlled in the work area PWSetup file. Let's take a look at a couple of the variables that establish workspace groups. First, we have Dynamic Workspace Group Name. This is set to be client name. Note on the left-hand side in ProjectWise Explorer, there's a folder called Client Name. This is a direct relationship. Under the version 10 section of the file, there is Dynamic Workspace Group Configuration Name. This is set to be Configuration 2023. This again is a direct relationship. Just simply by changing the variable names, we can change the location where the configuration looks for the content. The workspace name can also be set by setting Dynamic CE Workspace Name. The next demonstration will show the built-in path validation capabilities of the Dynamic Managed Workspace. What we will do in this exercise is enter a bad path name for one of the group name variables. We will then see what type of message we get from that. With the same setup as the previous demonstration, we're just going to change Dynamic Workspace Group Name to Configuration 2023X. Then launch the file. Here we see the message, not found configuration root in group root. It gives the path. And so we see that this is in fact an invalid path. We can take that and copy to the clipboard and verify that path if we so choose to do so. Once the configuration finds the workspace, it reads within the workspace a file called WorkspacePWSetup under the underbar PWSetup folder. This is organized into sections which help establish key framework variables. We're going to review just a few of those sections. We will look at Section 2, which helps us establish the worksets root. Section 3, which establishes the workset CFG file. Section 4 establishes workset root. Section 5 establishes DGNWS. And Section 8 is a new section which establishes or allows us to look at version control. Following this, we will demonstrate version control. Under the Workspace folder is a folder called Underbar PWSetup. Within that folder, there should be a file called WorkspacePWSetup, underbar predefined, and then some wildcard name after that. Let's open that file, get that so we can look at it. Here you see that it is organized into the sections that we previously mentioned. First one we want to look at is worksets root. We see the variable dynamic work area config path. This allows us to locate where our worksets root will be. We see that corresponds to worksets in the project. This then gets set to worksets root. Similarly, workset config is established. In this case, we're using the dynamic workset name to establish the work area root name. This then becomes the WorkspaceCFG file name. These get locked at this point. Section 4, similarly, sets the workset root. This can be adjusted if the path is not the dynamic work area root. We then set and lock those framework variables. Note that we do check if exist paths within this file to verify their existence. We then set and lock those. The next section 5 sets DGNWS variables. Section 8 shows an example of version control. In this, you can check the engine name and verify that the specific version of that product is being loaded. For example, let's look at OpenRoads Designer. We want to verify that 10.11 is being loaded with this workspace. To show this functionality, let's go up and open our file with OpenRoads 10.10, and we'll see the message that results from that. We see in the message that says version 10.10 of OpenRoads is not allowed for this workspace. So our version control is successful. The last demonstration in this lesson is about path parsing. This is a very advanced capability. With the Dynamic Managed Workspace, we can actually find a folder name and a path when it's not a work area. For example, we need to find a client ID folder and utilize that as our workset name. For this demonstration, I did a little off-lesson setup. I created a new work area called Connect Example ID. In this demonstration, we will create a subfolder called Client ID. We will move the workset content to be under the Client ID folder. We will rename the workset CFG to be Client ID CFG and delete the DGNWS. We will utilize an alternate workspace setup file, and we will edit this alternate workspace setup file to match the folder structure that we want to find. We will then demonstrate the result. Picking up from where we indicated, we will create a new folder in the Connect Example ID, and we will call that folder Client ID. The next step will be to move the content under the Client ID folder. Let's go into the worksets root and rename our config file to match the folder name, which is Client ID. We'll delete the DGNWS file because that is no longer needed and has the wrong brand. Let's go into our work area control file, the work area PWSetup. Let's make a slight adjustment here so that it reads a different workspace PWSetup. We do have that capability. In this case, we're going to use one called Find by Nest. Let's now look at that workspace PWSetup file. Let's adjust that file so we can look at it. In the initial example, Find-dir Nest is set to 2. If we look over at our project, we see that client ID is a child folder under the parent work area by a nest level of 1. We want to find that folder, so we set that nest to equal 1. The find name and path CFG utilizes this parameter and returns several useful variables. One of those is find-dir found nest name. This can be set to dynamic workset name. This is a bit complicated, but it's more important to understand that this is a capability that you can utilize with the Dynamic Managed Workspace. We can then utilize the folder name as the workset name. Let's open the file and see if we have success. We then check our workspace and workset. And we see that indeed has the workset of client ID. You have now been introduced to the Dynamic Managed Workspace. You have seen some of the basic capabilities. You may not be able to fully configure it, but you should at least have an understanding that the Dynamic Managed Workspace uses text-based configuration files. There is a work area PWSetup that can be used as a control file to determine which workspace is loaded. And the WorkspaceSetup file allows workspace-specific customization. Finally, I would like to thank you for watching this series of lessons on ProjectWise Managed Workspaces.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.